Chair of the Human Rights Commission, who's going to do a real official welcome.
Hi, thanks everybody for being here. I'm Kyle Bussey, just closing. I want to welcome you tonight to the Human Rights Commission's first and hopefully inaugural yearly Human Rights Roundtable. We hope that tonight we'll be able to talk to all of you and get your thoughts and opinions and feedback on the human rights issues that you're working on every day, what's working for you, what's not working, how we can work together to solve or attempt to solve the problems that we've identified and that we're working on in our everyday lives. Before we get started, I want to thank Concordia University for setting this up for us, for providing the space and all the hard work that it took to do all of this setup. Thank you so much, specifically to Pastor Bob. To Sharon and to Nicole of the President's Office. The Human Rights Commission has arranged for a donation to the university's Office of Service Leadership to express our gratitude. So thank you again so much. I want to say a few words about the Human Rights Commission, our history, what we do. Many of you may know who we are and what we do, and many of you may not, and that's one of the reasons that we're here today. There's been some form of human rights entity in the city of Portland for almost half a century. There have been various incarnations that have risen and fallen with the political and economic tides of our city government since about 1948. Our most recent predecessor was the Metropolitan Human Relations Commission, which was cut from the city budget in 2003. And then in 2008, City Council created the Office of Human Relations, and with it, the Human Rights Commission. When they did that, they recognized that Portland had, at that time, no human rights entity that holds us accountable for fulfilling our commitments under the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. And for that reason, the mission statement of the Human Rights Commission says that we are guided by the principles of the United Nations Declaration of Human Rights. So the Human Rights Commission was established to address a lack of focus on human rights in public policy. And also, as our mission statement indicates, to work toward eliminating discrimination, to strengthen intergroup relations, and to foster greater understanding, peace, inclusion, and justice for all Portlanders. To that end, the Human Rights Commission has spent the last 5 years since its most recent incarnation on such issues as community and police relations, use of force against communities of color, intergroup dialogues, protecting civil liberties in an era of increased homeland security, and protecting our immigrant neighbors, advocating for the rights of our homeless community, survivors of human trafficking, and the economically disadvantaged. And we do that in a number of different ways. First, we look at the policies of our local, state, and sometimes federal legislators, and to do what the original founding document said we were supposed to do, which was focus a human rights lens on public policy. And although this attention to city policy is a founding responsibility of the Human Rights Commission, we also have a unique dual purpose that allows us to reach out into the community and work toward eliminating discriminatory practices and foster greater understanding and partnerships between communities who might not otherwise come together. And that's another reason that we're here today. We do this by engaging in community outreach in various forms, such as gathering information at community forums, where topics have ranged in the last couple of years from our participation in the Joint Terrorism Task Force to protecting victims of human trafficking. We invite the community to participate in our meetings, and we hope to bring those meetings into the community more regularly in the future. And we hope that we'll see many of you there when we do that. And we will continue to collaborate with our community partners on the emerging issues that are affecting Portlanders, which we're doing today. Finally, we address many of our long-term challenges through the work of our various subcommittees and task forces. And if you want to learn more about the subcommittees and task forces that we are currently involved in, ask anybody with a Human Rights Commission pin. We'd be happy to talk to you about that. I do want to point out that we're a volunteer commission. We all have to pay bills in some other way, so we're constantly trying to find the time to achieve these important goals, which takes some strategic planning. And speaking of which, we had recently a strategic planning period where we identified ways that we might better engage with the community and do what we can to achieve those goals, which is, and this event is now proof of that planning. Before turning it over to the Community Discovery Committee, who's responsible for putting this event on today, I just want to focus on the historical context that we find ourselves in today. This week, despite the marriage equality cases that came down that we were very happy about today, I think that we should recognize that we have seen an erosion in civil liberties this week that is really unprecedented over the last half century. In the 40s and 50s, the U.S. Congress and the Supreme Court took meaningful steps to try to chip away and provide some remedy to this country's history of exploitation and discrimination. And over the last half century, those efforts have been chipped away at by conservative Supreme Courts. And I'm not sure that anybody was ready for what happened this week. The most meaningful civil rights legislation in our history was eroded in a way that nobody really, I think, could have anticipated. And I think that we should celebrate the victories, but not forget about the defeats. And I think that it brings into focus the importance of engaging in this kind of local community effort to protect our human and civil rights on a local level. So thank you all for being here today. I applaud all of you for making that effort and recognizing the importance of these local efforts. So with that, I would like to turn this over to the committee who made this all possible, the Community Discovery Committee. The Community Discovery Committee is made up of human rights commissioners, one community volunteer who is soon to be a human rights commissioner as well. Diallo Bennett, Human Rights Commissioner. Myra Ariola, Human Rights Commissioner. Amy Samara, Human Rights Commissioner. Donna Maxey, who is a Human Rights Commissioner now emeritus, I should say. And Linda McKim-Bell, who is an incoming Human Rights Commissioner. And also I want to make sure that we recognize the work of Jeff Selby, who is the top All right, the all party. Oh, I was supposed to do this.
Thanks, Kyle. So, welcome everyone. My name is Diallo Bennett, and I'm going to be speaking on behalf of the CDC To me, this event is tremendous because we have many major players in the same room at the same time. And our power is teaming with potential. And I think I can speak on behalf of the full HRC when I say that we're gonna squeeze this for all we can get, because our work largely depends off of you guys and off the community. So the purpose of CDC and this event, I think this off. So the purpose of the CDC and this event is, one, to gather insights about the needs and efforts in the Portland community, to help inform the HRC priorities, align our work with other initiatives, and to introduce the work of HRC to the broader community. This event is just a first step. The second step would be community forums, which will be open to the full community. So first we want to get the major forums, second full community. The forums so part of our interest tonight is to build that connection with you. So one, help us with outreach to those communities so that we can do the public forums, and then also to partner with some of you guys in order to organize those public forums. So there should be sheets on your table to sign up to do those public forums with us, as well as at the front registration desk. So thank you guys.
Thank you, Reyes. If I speak like this, can you hear me? Yes?
Yes.
All right. So as it was mentioned by Kyle and the Yellow, really our purpose tonight is to just gather your information, to listen to what you have been working on, what are the issues you identify, what are the gaps that you see, that HSC can really play a role with you guys and partner, support, help with outreach, basically collaborate with all of you and all your organizations and your work in a way that's meaningful for the community and that really helps address human rights issues in Portland. Everybody received a blue packet, and I would like to tell you a little bit of what information you have there. And you'll find the agenda. You'll also find information about HSC, who are the commissioners, each of the committees, a little bit of description about it, and who's the main contact, and also the members of those committees. At the same time, you'll see this piece, which is straight out of our strategic plan, the latest one we have, and really focused on the 4 areas that we are working on. And the Community Discovery Committee really came out of the first one, which is really to engage with the community, to establish stronger, deeper relationships with you and the community at large, and just help inform the HRC work overall. You'll also find a copy of the PowerPoint presentation if you want to look at it later. And 2 more things. One is at the end of the PowerPoint presentation, you'll see a list of the organizations we identified to specifically or very intentionally invite, because as far as our understanding and of the community, these organizations of you guys are the ones that are specifically working on issues in making change in systemic human rights issues in Portland. But the reason why we listed those organizations is because since this is the first step on the first human rights roundtable that we organize, if you see an organization or somebody that is not listed, if you identified somebody that is not listed there, we want to know. So for next time, we can make sure that they're in that table. So we keep improving our list and our contacts, and as new groups come out or new organizations are formed, we need your help in a way. So if you something or somebody that is not there, please let us know. And the way to do that is on the evaluation that you'll also find in the folder. And once we get into the discussion, we'll have an HSC host that Amy is going to talk about in a little bit, and they'll identify themselves as hosts. So just make sure to give that to them so we can get your feedback about what you thought of the event, what could be done better, any idea, any suggestion, we want to hear about that. Okay. So the next piece that I want to share with you is the goals for the event, which have been discussed a little bit by Kyle and Yellow. But really, we want to hear the issues and strategies you are working on. We want to identify the gaps, hear your insights of how can we support your work, and really just listen. Like, we're here to just listen to what you have to say, ideas, suggestions, works, anything that will really make the relationship between the HRC and the organizations more valuable. Okay? And also, what we're going to do is we're going to be collecting information through flip charts, and Amy again is going to share a little bit more of that logistical piece. But what we're going to do is gather all the information that comes out of this room today and create some sort of report that then we'll distribute back to you guys with all the topics that were discussed. And then we'll also include in the Human Rights Commission presentation to City Council. So it's like, this is what the community is saying and what the community is working on in regards to human rights. Thank you.
Okay, so if I talk like this, can you hear me? All right. Thank you. Okay. I am here to talk about the logistics. How are we going to do all that? So usually when you organize an event, you kind of plan for not all the RSVPs to arrive. So we are thrilled that all the seats are filled and a little bit more than we planned. So this is all very impromptu. Some of this is very impromptu, and I'm just going to walk you through how the format is going to, how we're suggesting the format can be for that discussion. As has been said, we've set this up to do some listening from you, as well as we gathered information when you RSVP'd. So on that Eventbrite, we asked you to talk to us about what you're working on, and we did our best to create themed tables around those issues you were working on. And we also tried to cross-reference those issues with other issues that might correspond to what you're working on. Perhaps strategies might be similar, for example. And so you guys represent a huge range of issues. Some of you actually were integral in making the HRC happen. And I just want to honor everyone in this room and all the work you are doing. I'm just thankful that you're here. So what we also have at the tables are HRC posts. So I'm going to go around and point out the tables and the posts so everybody can see where they are. So at this table there is education, civil liberties, and police accountability. And Damon Isaiah Turner is going to be HRC posting that table. Can everyone still hear me? Yeah. Okay, great, thanks. This one is transit, homelessness, environmental, economic justice, and use of public space. And John Versu is going to host that one. Here we have disability, violence, LGBTQ, healthcare, and foster care. And Malloy Good is going to host that. And fourth one, democracy, citizens' rights, racial justice, and ethnic justice. And Alan Lazo will be hosting. And this fifth one, is human trafficking, immigrant, and refugee rights. Okay. And we also have...
Who's hosting that day?
Sorry. Ashley. Ashley Horn is hosting that table. We also have set up 4 open tables. Actually, let's call it 3 right now. And is there any issue that you guys have recognized that we haven't represented yet? Please feel free to raise your hand. No? Okay. If it comes to you, oh yes.
Just violence in communities, especially police brutality,
Okay.
racial profiling.
Okay.
Could you give that over the mic, please, Amy, so we can hear?
Said racial profiling, police brutality, and community violence.
Okay. That we're thinking that that's going to fit with that first table. Would you list that, Damon? What we have there?
Right.
Yes, again.
I don't see anything having to do with youth empowerment.
Okay. Okay.
We have next that we don't get so bad now.
Yeah. So let me back up. So is that going to work for your topic, for that first table? Okay. So why don't we call this Youth Empowerment Table for anybody who wants to set up here? And you have another one?
Yeah, media justice, access to technology,
Okay.
communication.
Beautiful. So can that be over here as well? You guys can discuss that. Any others? Yes.
I was thinking with spiritual phobia.
Ah, okay. Can you join this table? Yeah.
You have this table titled Workers' Rights, and there are specific aspects that are very important of workers' rights that are listed, but there are a whole realm of other workers' rights issues that aren't listed. Are we to presume that that fits in this table?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Okay. Okay, so an improvement on our themes. Yes, sir.
Economic equality.
Can you do the housing here and gentrification here?
Economic justice is what's here.
And economic justice there? And we can, this is just preliminary, we can work that out, we can work the other more details out once we're moving them out.
Amy, was there something else that was here?
I'm going to talk about that in a second. So the HRC hosts who I just introduced, they're your listeners, they're note takers with our easel, and they're available for questions specifically about HRC. Okay. Kyle, our chair, is going to be rolling about as well for questions, and as will most of CDC. The HRC hosts are going to ask for one of you guys to facilitate, because we feel that will help HRC listen if we're not facilitating. We're going to ask those facilitators to help guide the conversation through the questions and make sure everyone is heard. When we report back, both the HRC host and the facilitators will team up with it, whatever way they see fit to do that report back. Okay? So here's our proposal. We're proposing one set of questions, which I'll show you in a second. And we're hoping to let you guys dive into a focused discussion about that, about both parts, for 3/4 hours. And then we want to move into, to let you guys move into optional roving discussion. There's something that you haven't been able to discuss that addresses a different table, a different issue. We'll let you know you'll have about 15 more minutes to go do that. So here's our questions. So everything that you'll contribute here with us, we intend to put into a report. And part one, what human rights issues are you working on? What communities are most affected? What are the strategies you're using to address those? We'll help you guys introduce yourselves to each other. Okay? And we also have a worksheet that Myra mentioned. We'll give you some time to jot responses to that down so you can hand that to your HRC host so we can have that record to go into our report. Part two questions contribute to the report back. So we wanted to have a public discussion about these two questions specifically. Okay? So at your tables, your facilitators and HRC hosts will try to allow the bulk of the conversation to be these two questions. Because we want this to be our richest part. So what gaps exist in efforts to address the Portland area human rights issues you're working on? And considering its role, how do you believe the HRC can help fill in those gaps? So, and the open table, if none of this seems to work for you, it doesn't seem like it's going to allow you to tell us what you need to tell us tonight, let's use this third open table for that purpose. And somebody will come over and ask what you need. If you need one of us to facilitate, we're happy to do that, or we're happy to also leave you alone. And again, so we have 45 minutes for that focus discussion, and then 15 minutes if you want to start roving. And please feel free to find a spot. And if you would, just take your plates with you so you can leave an empty space if you move for the person that takes your seat. Okay, and we're around for questions. Thank you.
So most of you know Donna Maxey, and we're really ready to hear what you guys have to say and have as much conversation as we can about the last two questions you guys worked on.
All right, thank you for coming tonight, and I just want to tell you I'm so excited to see all of you here. I feel like I can leave the commission, and I have birthed this baby. I've been saying it since the first day I got on that we need to be meeting with the community, and this is the first one. How many of you are excited that we are doing this? So I would like for you to keep your foot in the commission's behind, and I will help you do that since I'm no longer on the commission, to make sure that we continue to have these community meetings and forums and be a part of it. So what we need to do is a report out. We'd like for you to share what are the major points that you have brought up at your particular group. And we color-coded the charts so that we can have a difference. And Malloy is standing here, so I think his group should probably report first. But
Mine was the last one.
and you said that to say what? So, and what we want you to do is to share what are the main points that were on your charts that your group came up with. And if there are any other points that some of you in the audience would like to add, then please feel free to do that. We'll take a minute or so to do that. And we have how much time to do this, Amy? 1 hour? 1 hour. So 1 hour divided by 2, 4, 6, 7. So what's that?
Teacher.
Not quite. And you said that to say what? So we don't have quite 10 minutes. So let's say we have, how about we take about 7 minutes each? Oh, I'm gonna say 5 and then they're gonna take another 5. Okay, gotcha. All right, so we really are going to try and be on time with this. All right, so, and even though I know there are some people who don't want to come up and use the mic, it really is important that everyone be able to hear. And we would prefer that you come up and use the microphone up here. If it's harder to do that, then we're going to tear the microphone loose, or will we? No, we won't. Okay. We would like for you to be able to be heard, okay? So, here we go.
All right. So our group, the main heading was housing, and so we focused on housing-related issues, past present. I'm going to try to be real brief about this. What we wanted to do at the beginning was just put out as many ideas and issues that the folks felt existed. So we talked about accessibility and affordability of housing, accessibility being both physical and cultural accessibility, an equitable distribution of housing, to address segregation, gentrification issues, combating involuntary displacement, criminalization of houselessness, and then the fact that when people are houseless and they find a place that they can stay and they go in there, the next thing they know, the cops are showing up saying, "Hey, you can't be here. Now you're going to go to jail." We talked about how there are a lack of what I term home occupier protections, because that includes tenants who are renting, but also it includes homeowners who are faced, with bad mortgage situations and maybe in foreclosure or threatened with it. The existence of no-cause evictions is an issue. Past criminal history is a barrier to accessing housing. Being a survivor of domestic violence can oftentimes be a barrier. Having an assistance animal is a barrier. The distribution of Section 8 voucher holders, the lack of inclusion in zoning. There's not a lot about the intersection of youth and not homeless, but just housing issues in general, unless it's youth and homeless issues. There's a lack of assistance for people who don't have particular issues. They're not disabled, they're not, a single mother, they're not, but they still have problems, and there's no resource, there aren't adequate resources for them. And then a lack of safe shelter outside. So when people do find space and want to put up a tent so that they can have a modicum of privacy, they're prohibited from doing so. So those were kind of the global issues that we use to frame our discussion about the two questions. What gaps do we see that exist in community-wide efforts to address housing issues in Portland? There's open and accepted discrimination. A lot of the efforts to address needs are very much siloed. So people work on these issues over here, and people work on these other issues over here. But there's a ton of overlap and a ton of cross-coordination that may be that there's the potential for, and it's not being realized or utilized. The public is not very organized around these issues. Housing justice campaigns. I mean, there just isn't a one. As the Human Rights Commission, we endorsed the Section 8 protection that I guess is still at the legislature. We also endorsed the removal of the ban on inclusionary zoning. Had there been thousands of people descending upon the state capitol, both of those would have moved through a lot quicker. The inclusionary zoning one died in committee or adjacent to the committee, and then the Section 8 one is stuck somewhere. There's a lack. So there was a discussion about there being a lack of education in general, both for housing consumers, meaning tenants or homeowners, about their rights and kind of how systems work. But then people also talked about how we need to educate people about the houseless population and the causes of houselessness. Because when we walk down the street, when some people walk down the street and they see someone who's living on the street, and they don't think about what led to them being here, and they don't realize how close they themselves might be to that situation. And if they did, they might want these issues addressed more urgently. Again, more lack of education to housing providers around what their obligations are. And also we had a discussion about there's a lack of enforcement and accountability efforts. The existing systems are clogged and difficult for people to access and difficult for people to navigate, and they don't provide reaffirming results. All right, 3 minutes. There is an intersection between healthcare issues and housing issues, but again, these are being addressed separately, and there could be more collaboration on those issues and possibly harnessing some unity. And then also the decision makers, both on healthcare and housing issues, tend not to consider what are the healthcare ramifications of this housing decision, what are the housing ramifications of this healthcare decision. So again, everybody's just sort of doing their own thing and not really. Is there anything anybody would like to see added?
You guys make me look bad. I'm trying to steal some time for you. Okay.
No, I'm not supposed to do that. Send every comment. Hold the floor for 13 hours.
Yeah.
Well, I don't think I can. Okay. So this was obviously the last thing we talked about, and we didn't have as much time for it. But what is the role that the HRC can help to fill these gaps? So one of the things we talked about was focusing the energy and efforts on engaging the community on human rights issues. One of our participants pointed out that all of you and the groups that you represent and the populations you represent, that translates into reaching out to thousands of people. So this is a huge resource to have our issues addressed, to move them to the forefront, and not be stuck on the back burner as something certain elected officials can point to and say, oh, see, I'm human rights friendly. So a way of providing that kind of accountability. The discussion was around the HRC being able to either create or continue to provide a bridge for the existing resources and the sharing of information and resources. I think that this is certainly a step in that direction. Getting everybody together, talking to each other. And then to provide direct advocacy on human rights issues when partners experience problems. So if Sisters of the Road runs into an issue over the houseless population, they can come to us and we might be able to do something, whether it is just write a letter or talk to a decision maker and say, hey, this is a huge human rights problem. You need to knock it off. And I'm out of time, which is great.
Nice job.
Is there anything that any of you would like to add? So if you think of something that you would like to add to this one, this was the housing table, and you might write it on a piece of paper and you can turn it in at the end if you'd like to, okay? Which group would like to go next? Including Joanne.
Thank you. And so our table had prison, education, civil liberties, and police accountability. What we didn't have was the info that they were equal in weight at our table. And we spend the bulk of our time talking about police accountability because guess what? Most of us cared about that. And so when we talked about what gaps we saw, the first thing came up was how the current process works if you are a community member who's filed a complaint with the police. And the first recommendation was that people need assistance with that process. You have to actually almost have a doctor's degree to figure it out. And then you have to have longevity because it takes about 2 years to work through the process. And you're going to find out that they didn't do anything wrong once you get there. But people need help to get through that process. And so we're hopeful that the Human Rights Commission will address that. Also, people need to just know that there really is a process and what it is and how to use it. There needs to be a centralized location where groups and individuals can go, where they can get trusted information and they don't have to be concerned that they're trying to get it from police or a government building and entity. We also said that the Human Rights Commission should have status reports with the city on criminal justice issues like the JTTF and the Sit-Lie ordinance. Like the Human Rights Commission should be leading the city council because they need help. We also talked about the community court system and how when we send people to jail, we have this illusion that they don't come back, and so we know that 95% of people do come back to local communities, and so if people don't have access to housing or employment or a whole host of other city services, then they're less likely to be successful when they come back to our community. And so we were hopeful that we could actually expand our community court so that we are actually feeding less of our young people into the criminal justice system. We talked about a disconnect from part of the city's budget, and so this is summertime, so I'll give you a great example that we use. This is June, so in June, the press releases start coming out about gang activity increasing. And so you may have been following the news in the last week, 10 gang shootings. But if you actually read the media reports, you would see that nobody was quoted in those media reports. And so you have to ask, where did that information come from? And where it came from was the Public Information Office and Portland Police Bureau. Because what happens in June is we tell you we have a gang problem. And then what happens in July is we go out and start targeting black and brown youth and start harassing them. And so, and then in September, we go back to life as usual because summer's over. And so we want to interrupt that cycle and say, when we hear in the media that gang activity's up, let's find out who's saying that and why they're saying that and what the motivation is. We also talked about employment, there's some real escalation of intimidation of young people and others, where gang of TriMet enforcement officers come onto the train and then pretty much harass everybody and give everybody tickets. And so we don't think that's the goal of the TriMet rider people, is to harass our young people. And so we need to make sure that that stops happening. And we hope the Human Rights Commission agrees with us. And so, some specific things we'd like to see is a rapid response from the Human Rights Commission, because the Human Rights Commission currently operates like a government entity, right? Something happens today, a year from now, you can respond to it. But meanwhile, the community is in an uproar today, and they're expecting a response from the organization that protects our human rights. Earlier tonight, we heard about all this great, wonderful success that the Human Rights Commission has acquired, but nobody out in the community knows that you're actually having success because we don't know where the information is. And so maybe a newsletter would be an appropriate thing for the community. This is another thing. The CPRC needs to address the issue of the police accountability on its website so that as the public, we don't have to search all over the world looking for how do we get information to find out what's happening around accountability. Considering the role of the HRC, we think they should be a clearinghouse for information on community organizations that conduct Know Your Right trainings and seminar and police trainings. We also think that it would be beneficial for the community to work with Portland Police and train them so they understand the school-to-prison pipeline and understand what role they have in feeding our kids into that school-to-prison pipeline and how we can interrupt that behavior. And that is it, and I have 2 minutes to spare.
Okay, and one of the things I thought we would do is take the sign from your table and put it with your flip chart, and then you'll know exactly who's worked that one. But, okay.
Joanne was really thorough, but can we just make sure that there's nobody else at the table?
Are there any other questions? Anything else anyone would like to add from any of the other tables? You guys are just so thorough. Okay, what other group would like to report? Okay, right here. I guess we're just going in a circle here. This microphone is working so good. And when you talk on the mic, you need to do the rock star thing. That's where it really picks up your voice. You gotta act like you're singing. I don't think you want to sing. That's it.
We're going to work in teamwork. So our table was talking about transit, homelessness, the environment, economic justice, and the use of public space. And we primarily ended up talking a lot about awareness, which seems to have come up in all of these discussions. So the initial gaps that we found were that there's not enough data, both from our organizations and from everybody's, that we feel like it's hard to collect in Portland, and that there's not a lot of hard data on economic justice, for instance. And that we have a lot of anecdotal evidence, but it's not quantitative. And for instance, the perception versus the reality, there's this awareness, right? One of the great examples was that, oh, we have this great MAX train, but people don't know that that has meant a reduction in bus services and creating awareness around different issues in our community. And we basically talked a lot about lack of awareness, a disconnection in the individual's mind from sort of what's happening and what it means to them, and empowering people to think about how each of these, all of our activities are connected, so that the access to public space is the same thing as living in poverty, as is justice for instance, working families, as is, right? You can, like, all of these are interconnected, and that as a person, you're probably going to experience a few or many of these issues. So working within organizations to raise awareness of the overarching goals of human rights, for instance. So we wrote that Portland Coalition's work, because we really saw this as like, what's the gap in our efforts as organizations, kind of we talked And we said there's something still missing, and we think it's probably that we often work in single-issue coalitions, and that for a long time hasn't always inspired people to get involved in something that doesn't directly affect them, for instance. And we've really talked about focusing on communication, having larger discussion, and when we sort of work on single issue, we drain resources, and that it becomes harder and harder to keep up the momentum for that particular thing. So we talked a lot about the relationship between being an expert in something and being somebody who's experienced something, and connecting those two. So you can have a PhD in social work, and you can be somebody who's experienced houselessness, and those are both important pieces of the same puzzle. And we talked about the oppression of polite culture, which is a great term I'm now going to use. Which is that, I know he's not here, that in Portland especially, we work often from a sort of progressive, middle-class, white view of how things are, and we're polite and nice. And a lot of the stuff that all of us work on isn't polite and nice. And that there has to be a way to have the discussion that just says, this is terrible, and this has to be fixed. And that we're not just beginning a conversation, and there's not just the end of a conversation. One of the things we talked about was when the conversation is brought up, that we're not saying, so one of the examples we gave was, like if you say, there's a serious racial justice issue in Portland, people say, but everybody bikes to work. Or, so that there's, and that's a good thing, but we have all these different issues that people need to work on, and so it's connecting the beginning and the end of the conversation. So what we thought the HRC would do, and actually this came up at the end, but I'm going to mention it first, because the first question we had to ask was, what do you do? Apologies, but we sort of had to, so actually, John was kind enough to list what you do, and then we sort of added categories. So we think the first thing you could do is to actually raise awareness of what you do to your key stakeholders, so that we can better engage. And then we really thought we also thought helping produce data, being a clearinghouse for data, and working on talking about this, creating some action items that people can react to as a part of a human rights frame. And we really thought a lot about you guys going to others' meetings and meeting people where they are also, and letting them know that what they're experiencing is a part of the human rights frame. We of course think we should have workshops and opportunities to work together. And we also, what we really wanted to do was not always work on issue-specific community stuff, but be a place where we can all work together. And I'll just keep repeating that apparently. And then really that you guys could tell the bigger story, and that's both to people on the ground and also to legislators, that you have some of the ability and the clout to speak to the community in a way that maybe each individual organization can't. And of course, we also thought if you guys could provide grants, that would be great. So that was what we came up with.
If we actually had a budget, maybe we could. So we've got 1, 2, 3. So who wants to go next? So we're just going in a circle. You guys are trying to. All right, Alan, I think you're just going to have to hop. Well, I don't know. Here, try this. Here, come over here. How's that?
Can I reach?
That's it.
All right. Our group was equity, democracy, citizens' rights, racial justice, and ethnic justice. So, a pretty narrow focus, which drove our conversation. What I came away with it from it was hearing a lot about the need to make connections between organizations and the need to get knowledge out about the civic and regulatory process, and knowledge out about not only cultural competency, but about many communities, such as disability communities, and then the need for greater support and advocacy, and support not just in the form of money, but also from public statements from leaders that support the work that's being done by organizations. And what we heard from about what the HRC could do would be the same thing, make sure we publicize what our role is, what we could be doing, how we might better bring organizations together, provide access to something like a media team that organizations could access and help provide response to issues. We heard also about the newsletter and information going out from us, and also folks coming to ask us for letters of support or policy statements around support. So those were the general themes I heard, I think, and there were some other specific ones. So again, big ones around coordination. What can we do? Some work to bring together organizations that are working in our community. We had some discussion around initiatives that are being put forward to help end foreign wars and redirect that spending on local budgets that are being cut so much now. I already mentioned the media team piece. There was another specific comment about city resources to enable those with disabilities to be able to stay in their homes and to provide more support for supportive housing that allows those with disabilities to stay in their homes. And also we had folks who were advocating for parents to be able to advocate for their rights and their kids' rights, especially in the school system, and to keep them in their homes, so advocating with agencies and schools. And one of the successes that the group talked about was working to bring together not just the usual cast of folks and working to build relationships among lots of different organizations in that success. Again, that issue around publicizing the HRC's role, we talked about often when there are issues that arise in a rapid response fashion, that there are faith-based communities that are the first to respond. And there was a request that the HRC join that initial response also. The HRC might help provide a meetup function or be a big picture matchmaker for organizations that are doing work and kind of watching over the work that's being done in the community. And again, I don't think we're too far off from developing an email outreach and newsletter to let folks know what we're doing. And all that we can capture. Is there anything else that I missed from the table?
Would anyone like to add anything? Okay, Viola?
I know, Commissioner, but I didn't see something about like destigmatizing things like mental health as far as the gap, destigmatizing, because I mean every piece of the body can get sick, why can't the brain?
Can you write that on?
To maybe focus on destigmatizing.
And I think that was around the education piece and the cultural competency also, making sure that folks are educated about it.
And also for people who are mentally ill, getting help and getting housing is also really difficult. So how do we connect groups to make it so that, or people who are focused on housing into possibility? Thank you.
And would Viola sum it up again so she can know that last bit?
The last part was connecting the community with the people who are helping. So hospitals with people who are helping with housing for mentally ill, or increasing the need for it, increasing the awareness about the need.
Thank you. I don't think this is going to make it to the next table.
So, media people, I can talk without the microphone, that's fine.
Cool.
Hi. Is my time started? My name is Ace, and I just have a quick question, because we had 3 people at our table, and I know all of these issues are important, but who here used a cell phone with a camera, a computer, or looked at that screen driven by a computer today? Please raise your hand. Okay, so all of us are actually sitting at the media table, because this had to do with access to technology and basically this new form of communication, which is really a new language. The digital realm is kind of a new language. So our discussion focused around how that impacts our daily lives.
I come from a perspective as a media maker where I teach people basic media skills. We went through the NAIA Community Center, which deals with Native American youth elder empowerment, and SEI, Self-Enhancement Institute, which is community-based organizing. So we actually had a very interesting community-based discussion about how media affects our lives, which I thought all of you would be grateful for. And some of the themes that came up that are related to media were sovereignty, the ownership and control of our systems of communication, multi-generational issues, how we can communicate across technology barriers in ways that some people just don't understand but are imperative to all organizing, and a participatory process or alternative systems of education. That's something we all deal with in our own work and think is really important when it comes to media. So we basically came up with what the Human Rights Commission and all of us should do on some level or another to address what came up as sort of the sticking points. So I'm just going to read out what we thought would be great because it kind of addresses what we think is lacking. There needs to be some form of a community media empowerment series or maybe a roving workshop or at least a model that all of us can use to deal with the following issues. One, navigating predatory systems. Media can either control us or we can learn to control it. A lot of issues with sort of predatory lending, emails, postal service stuff even that comes in for immigrant groups is very disconcerting. People's children are receiving emails, they don't understand where it's coming from. So somehow navigating the world of that technology realm, but also flipping that and coming up with ways to use it positively. There are all sorts of programs that help people find cheap housing, really creative uses of the internet that we should have more access to. So we wanted to address sort of the ownership by this crazy internet thing and our ways to use it positively. We wanted to acknowledge the effect of media and technology on our children and our own lifestyles, how people go home and zone out. And we just want to talk about that as a community. We want to talk to parents about how they can limit that, and sometimes having someone like me or others who are more versed in the realm of media showing you how to change your Wi-Fi password, or showing you how you can understand what different sites are, if they're secure or not. Basic stuff. The library could offer it, but we could also have a teach-in in any of our groups that could be useful. We wanted a media literacy empowerment workshop for youth to dissect identity portrayal, and basically media literacy is a form of understanding and reading incoming stuff. So it's advertisements on TV, it's advertisements around us, it's films, music videos. If we can have a discussion with kids on their level, where they're starting from, we can actually have a discussion about racism, about all sorts of things. Gentrification, although we decided to call it displacement, lots of stuff. And we also wanted some basic skill shares to respond and manage control. How to use your telephone camera to film the police, what you're allowed to do. How to use your telephone camera to document abuses in your workplace. How to make film, if you feel like it, if you're a kid. Basically, any level of skill sharing would be useful, as well as any level of understanding how to use and access technology positively for our lives, and then having a discussion about how media affects us to have deeper discussions about community issues are all things we felt were important. And the last one was understanding, as a city and a county, how proprietary systems of technology are different than open source community-run systems of technology, which is a tech discussion, but it's actually a community discussion. Multnomah actually has an Office of Community Technology. I didn't know that until like 4 days ago. But they're trying to have community-owned and run broadband networks so that we're not relying in 50 years using a 7 generations model on Comcast. We need to do this. I know only 3 people sat at the table, but it affects all of us. So somehow having that kind of discussion infuse all of our discussions is important. How the HRC can support this? We had an open array of ideas. Possibly an online resource guide for funding resources for us. Any social justice group or community group in Portland, it's hard to navigate the internet and all those various things. Maybe the HRC could compile lists, if they don't have funding themselves, to help with that access issue. Yeah, a positive list of resources. And then the U.S. Social Forum is probably going to be having a regional If you're not familiar with the social forum, you should look it up, but there's going to be a media track at the social forum as well as many other tracks here. HRC should support the social forum in whatever way is possible. That would be a useful further step, and maybe support the media series that we came up with.
Wow. Is there anything, get ready to write, Anita, is there anything that someone would like to add to this? Yes. Anita, you want to write it on?
I'm trying to put it to work. Understanding mainstream media. You know, 4 years ago, I went to Kent Ford, he had a talk, and he said that how mainstream media can make you look like the bad guy. They showed a picture of a McDonald's burning up, then they put his picture there. It didn't say he did, but you know, if you look at it, you'll say, oh, he's a bad guy, he burned up McDonald's. So maybe we can teach how to understand how the mainstream media put things out, have a workshop or a class.
How they do subtle brainwashing.
Yeah, subtle brainwashing.
That's all part of a media literacy concept, and it's all about dissecting those incoming things and having people talk about what they're seeing and what that means, and then they identify it wherever they go. That's simple. There's lots of curriculums already developed around media literacy. We are going to teach one at Portland Community Media probably in the fall. But yeah.
And if you have not seen this, I would like for all of you to write this down. There's a great video on YouTube called Effing Mutt. That's effing, you know, like horsing.
Is it the real effing or is it called EFF?
It's called F. Dot,
Okay.
you know, with asterisk, effing mutt. And it's a video that a young man in New York, he had, there's no video, but there is audio. And he had his cell phone on when the police were stopping him. And then it was posted on YouTube. It is powerful. It is powerful. And they didn't know he was doing it. So that's an example of how we can teach youth to protect themselves and to expose what's going on when it's incorrect. All right, so we have one more table.
Here, wait, I want to.
Yes, two more.
And two more? Okay. So I just want to echo and shout that mass media affects all of us. The public airways are supposed to be owned by the public. Each media source thought that it would create world peace from the printing press to radio to TV. And it's unjust that all media is owned by the same 5 people. And it also doesn't benefit society. So I just wanted to say that.
So you're saying decentralization
Yes.
of media?
Yes, that would be related, yeah, understanding the open source versus proprietary discussion should totally take that on. Breaking down the mainstream and talking about alternatives to that mainstream and empowering people with the skills to counteract the mainstream.
And also, just to jump off that one more time, for instance, cigarette ads, they are technically illegal because if you're giving ads to children, it's causing murder. And so, like, people could be jailed for these kind of things, and all we have to do is fight for that. So,
I'd like to add one more thing to that, which is advertising of pharmaceuticals. It was pointed out on the radio today that the United States is only one of 2 countries that allows advertising about drugs on media.
There's another contribution over here, Sarah.
I think it was under when it said access to technology. I think we need to kind of address the digital divide because this very much talks to people that actually have access to internet, smartphones. Many people can't afford it, language barriers. We have to look at that side as well, as far as education.
That's a huge side. The fact that we are increasingly relying on technology when people don't have access to it is the point, I think. You know, yeah.
Do we have 2 more groups or what? And the name of this group was
This group was youth justice and empowerment.
So, I wanted him to present because he's still considered a youth to me. We talked about what we do. You guys can't hear me?
Yeah, but just be a little loud.
Oh, we talked about what we do with youth and how we do our work in the community. So me being from AFSC just talked about the work that I do with young people in the schools and in our office, opposing the militarization of young people, helping to create peace clubs in high schools, working on all peace issues and developing youth leadership through activism and community service. And then we had folks at our table from Resolutions Northwest, right? Who talked about Multnomah Youth Commission, but are you in partnership with?
With Opal and Resolutions.
With Opal and Resolutions Northwest, working on conflict resolution workshops inside of middle schools and high schools. And so we talked about how we do our work in the community. When we talked about what we seen that existed in the community-wide efforts to address the Portland area issues that we're working on and the gaps, some of the gaps we seen were when people are not connecting the issues, that a disservice to one youth is a disservice to all youth, and making the connections between access, the school to prison pipeline, having a community service element involved in working in schools, and also kids having access to institutions of power such as banks, and learning about financial literacy, loans. A lot of young people who don't have access to money consider enlisting in the military or consider doing other things to get money to go to school, if they even go to school, while some youth that have access to a lot, it's not even an option. It's not something that they think about. They automatically know that they're going to college. We talked about how kids should have more access to art colleges and sports camps, career center events, as well as having access to travel, to learn about what the Peace Corps is and how to go around the world and build wells instead of going to Iraq and possibly having to hurt someone's child. We talked about having to have more access to conflict resolution trainings, and how some schools don't take conflict resolution trainings as serious as other schools, and it really depends on the faculty and having good relationships with teachers and students inside of the schools, that we should switch from having a punitive to a restorative justice structure in schools, and that we should possibly think about doing a victim offender mediation program, as well as training disciplinarians. I don't know what that is. We have some gaps here. And then the second question was, considering its role, how do you believe that HRC can help fill in those gaps? And two answers were just by hearing the stories from the people in the community that are doing the work in the community. And by doing that, the HRC can be a vehicle of support for us. And I don't know if anyone else wanted to add anything. And I also think it would be helpful for the HRC to work on advocacy issues with people doing youth work, even when the subject is really ugly, like talking about things like why there are military recruiters inside of low-income schools that have high numbers of communities of color, and not at Lincoln High School or at Wilson.
Okay, there's another idea over here.
Yeah, when I was about 16, I was always in trouble. I never wanted the police to find me, I didn't want my parents to find me. Now, there's a problem with that.
Right.
Yeah, you got a lot of them hiding from me.
Right. So, and we touched on that a little bit by talking about how to break the school to prison pipeline. And that is what the work of these fine young ladies here are doing by going into the schools and trying to build a structure and a culture of resolution and peace. So that young people are learning in middle school how to deal with conflict before it gets really bad and they end up going to jail.
Any other comments, Alan?
The other thing I think that's really valuable that I've seen is introducing at an earlier stage what we talked about here, education around the process, the civic and regulatory process. I think I've been talking to high school students before that weren't aware of how city processes work and those processes. And if folks get involved earlier, and young folks have a lot more energy than those old folks. So I think that might be helpful too. And I think things like the Youth Commission really help get that education out there about how you can affect change at a civic or regulatory level.
I saw another hand over here, young lady who reported from media.
I just had a question of if you talked about getting youth to participate in this process, because that always seems to be the thing that's hard. If we're adults talking about youth stuff, yes, there are some youth here, but how do we actually have participation and leadership coming from
Well,
this?
something that I do is I find teachers, and we talked about this some in our group, I find teachers that work in the public schools that I have a relationship with that I know are down with the issues. So this year we had a partnership with Leap High School, and their principal is an activist who was an activist for a long time with PCAS, as well as their internship instructor. So they were more than happy to give me high school interns that wanted to learn about what doing peace organizing looks like. And so I don't know if either of you want to, or...
Actually, I'm going to add, so I went to a school called Trillium Charter School, and our focus was on being the change, and I think that's possibly one of the influences that I had growing up. And so I think that if you just have that in schools, instead of the war culture, things like video games and even some violent sports. So I think that just introducing that at an earlier age, introducing civic engagement, introducing restorative justice. We didn't have punitive punishment at Trillium. We had only mediations and things like that. So possibly could be worse.
Any other additions to that? Yes.
Yeah, I mean, I think to tackle your question, I think that how do you get youth engaged? I think the real issue is as organizations. So, the Multnomah Youth Commission is a model of a youth adult partnership, right? So its philosophy is that young people and adults are working simultaneously, collectively, to make change happen in the community, both inside government and partnering with outside organizations. And the fundamental philosophy of what we do is, as adults, it's our responsibility to create space and really make institutional change in bringing young people to the table in authentic and valuable ways. And so every organization that at least works on, human rights issues, the most vulnerable populations, the most disenfranchised historically have always been young people, and then young people of color, and then immigrant and refugee youth, and disabled youth and queer youth, and it's always the young people who have no ability to have any vote or any voice in policy. And so it's really the responsibility as us as adults to challenge our organizations that we work within, to create structures inside to make room for true youth adult partnership. Because if you do that, the youth will come through the doors and engage in a way that is authentic and real and valuable, because both everybody involved is getting something out of it. Everybody is growing developmentally. Not only the young people are growing, but the adults in the system and the community is growing as well. And so what we do, I mean, one of my jobs to do is to train community in how to do youth adult partnership work. So if you want more information, definitely contact me and the county and the youth commission, and we can help build this movement.
Jeff, you had something you wanted to say?
I was just thinking, you know, any of your organizations that have the ability and the resources to have a youth group. I know the Japanese American Citizens League has a very active youth group called Unite People, and they've taught us on the board quite a few things about civic engagement as well. So we put a lot of resources and time into making sure that they're respected and that they have the support of the old senior group of us on the board. But yeah, so it's a great idea.
You all write that down, please? Thank you. I have a question, and since I am retired and I am a senior citizen, so my question is why we have so much bullying. Bullying has always gone on, but this is such a spectacular nastiness that I've never seen before, and the outcome is that youth are committing suicide, which is not something that happened when I was in school. So I'm not sure what is the difference between now and then as to why. I mean, I know we have access to media and it, you know, goes viral and gets worse. But I don't understand. Maybe that's something we need to look at too. I'm not asking for an answer. I'm just saying let's put that down. Okay?
Yeah.
All right. So great job. Good job. Good job. And so Amy said some. Yes, Kyle.
I think there's
one more table.
One more. Oh,
yes.
You know what? I got too excited.
It's
Gee, I had all this time. Okay, workers' rights. Here's the microphone.
Workers' rights plus everything else.
Yep.
So what else is under there?
Where's your
We actually ran out of flip charts, so I'm just going to go ahead and read from my notes and from memory. And if
You
this
guys
table
didn't
can
have a
please.
flip chart?
No.
Oh.
We broke the rules, but it wasn't our fault. So we're workers' rights, and that includes human trafficking, immigrant rights, and refugee rights. And I just want to say that we had a really broad conversation about the really amazing effort and work that's going on among people represented at this table and organizations. So we actually focused a lot of our time on part one, just identifying the strategies and what are some of the obstacles to those strategies that are currently being employed. But focusing on part two, the gaps that exist in community-wide efforts, I'm just going to go through some of these, and I'm not going to get all of them, and if you want to interject, please do. We talked a lot about immigrant workers and there being a gap in reaching all parts of community because communities are fragmented or isolated geographically or otherwise, and there are linguistic barriers, cultural barriers, geographic barriers, service barriers. And so within that conversation, a lot about capacity and resources. How do we get the information out and get the resources available to the different pieces or populations that really need the services that are out there, and how do we build capacity? And there were some examples provided, like there are some services available to certain immigrant populations, but at our table there was mention that there aren't any specific services about immigrant workers' rights for African immigrant populations that we're aware of, where there's an organizational capacity in place already to deal with that. And so there are, like the Northwest Justice Project wants to, be available and provide those resources, but if you don't have staff who have that linguistic or cultural background or that basic, capacity to serve that specific population in place, it's hard to do that. And then there's the resources and funding issue that comes up repeatedly. The scope of the issue when dealing with immigrant rights, it goes from beginning to end in all of the different topical conversations today. So I heard a lot about media and use of storytelling. And one thing that might be helpful is a lot of organizations have already captured stories from individuals who have experienced directly human rights abuses or immigrant individuals. And it might be good for the Human Rights Commission to consider being a clearinghouse or a central place where some of those could be showcased in response to that identified gap. I think also access to information is somewhat related to media, and that again, this is also related to resources and not having adequate funding and everything. A lot of organizations can't access academic journals or other, like LexisNexis was cited, or other resources that they're proprietary, that require a fee be paid to access them. And they have a lot of really important academic and other information out there that would help shape community understanding, and there's a need for sharing of these resources or pooling of them. A lot of conversation about there are so many different services out there, and how do we have a centralized location where people can find a listing of them, and a little bit of information about when those resources are available because of funding cuts and everything else. There's a systematic issue where people go to access resources and they're not open on a given day, or they're not meant to serve your issue or your population, all of that. So potentially the Human Rights Commission could be that clearinghouse of information and help with that referral process. That being said, there were some really great resources that exist, so we're not saying that there are none out there, like the city resources, and there are others that were mentioned as well. This need, I think it's very true to the issue of immigrant workers' rights and everything that we were talking about here, this need to humanize the issue of rights, that it's not just an economic issue or shooting down to the a lot of people discuss the economics of workers' rights and other things, and really understanding that these are humans we're talking about, and infusing our conversation at the HRC and wherever else we're present with these Universal Declaration of Human Rights principles and this guiding language that really helps shape what we're here, what we're standing for, and making sure that the HRC really take a lead role in sharing that information, helping to educate our policy decision makers, and making sure that when we do bring up issues, we hook them to those universal human rights articles or other universal human rights governing documents and principles. Understanding the different kinds of violations, there are still issues where a lot of people don't have a central place to meet or share this information, and the Portland Public, I really liked that reference to the polite community or polite culture or polite communications. It's very true here. People kind of turn a blind eye to a lot of issues or don't think they exist at all. And I think this need to actually, the HRC to serve as this body that educates at all levels, policy decision makers, communities, other organizations, that these issues are going on. Here are the resources that are available and all of that. Am I missing anything? Yes.
Well, it's not exactly missing, but maybe to put it in a slightly different slant. One of the things we talked about was a lot of the things that we talk about in public policy conversations, in litigation over employment rights, get boiled down to economics. And you very quickly devolve into sort of Chicago school economics where it's like, well, it may not be good for this individual worker, but it's good for overall for business and creates more jobs and blah, 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 blah. Actually, international human rights law contains very powerful protection, not just of torture and the First Amendment kind of rights, but of labor rights. And those are internationally recognized legal responsibility. Only thing is, we don't think they apply to us because we're Americans, number one, and Americans, of course, are exceptional. And then after all, we're Oregonians, and Oregonians are exceptional among Americans, and so really, international standards don't have anything to teach us. One very useful role, and it seems to me central to the charter of the Human Rights Commission, would be to the extent you can lift up those aspects of the Human Rights Charter, particularly in areas where people don't really know much about it, like labor rights, and begin to get people in policy positions to be thinking about that, it would be very useful.
Anybody else want to add something? Gone. Okay.
We have a couple of things left to do that we need to do. We have an evaluation that we need to have done by you, and so there's a couple of things we'd like for you to do. We'd like to give you a few minutes to fill out your evaluation, and also there's a form in your booklet that had questions, that 1 through 3, what's the title of that one? What's the name? The worksheet. We really would appreciate if you would give us your worksheets, put your name on it, and turn those into your HRC leader. And what we'd like to do is give you a few minutes to fill out your evaluation. Please do not be polite. Give critical feedback, because we really need the critical feedback in order to make this work for the future. Being polite and saying, gee, you guys did a good job, ain't gonna cut it. So we need you to really be critical in your thinking. And then we'll give you about, is 2-3 minutes long enough to do that? And then we'd like to ask you, what are some ideas that stood out for you at the very end? Okay? And any other feedback that you'd like to give about the event? Yes, ma'am. And there's a community forum sign up. Each of your facilitators at your table have a sign-up sheet if you are interested. And by community forum, what we mean is that we want to come out, the HRC come out and meet in the community and have a community organization be the host, to invite the public, to invite your constituents to come. And we do have a little bit of a budget maybe for food, maybe a little bitty budget. Yes, we do. We have a budget for food, so you should be signing up. So please sign up at your table. And you've got about 2 more minutes.
At the far end on your left.
So please take one of their cards and go by and patronize their restaurant. And I'm about to do a commercial because, see, y'all are talking and you're talking through my commercial. I'm an elementary school teacher. You know how we are. So anyway, Amy said that everybody knew me. No, everybody does not. I'm Donna Maxey. I'm the founder director of Race Talks. And Rania is my new best friend. She left already. Anyway, next Tuesday at Jefferson High School from 6 to 8:30, we have Race Talks, and that is the Arab Muslim experience in Oregon through women's perspective. We have the perspective of an African American, African, and an Arab woman. So please come to that, and then that's in the cafeteria. And the following Tuesday at Kennedy School, we have unnatural causes, which is a film, couple of the films on that video about health inequities that will blow your mind, So I hope you can come, and those people who are trained, I keep hearing people say, oh, we're trained facilitators and all that stuff. Please come to Race Talks. We need more facilitators. One of the things that makes Race Talks different is that we have trained facilitators to lead the discussions, and we need more facilitators coming. And the Human Rights Commission has been a sponsor of Race Talks. So please come and do that.
When's the next HRC meeting?
The next HRC meeting is the first Wednesday of every month.
No, it's on the 10th of July. We moved it to the 10th.
To the 10th of July. So, oh, that's right, it's not next Wednesday. So the 10th of July. So any feedback that anyone would like to give